Hello, welcome to my show that's hosted by Unique Voices in Films and the Path of Consciousness. I'm your host, Weam Namou, and today my guest is Karen Tintori. Hello and welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, Weam.
Well, I'm very happy that you're here. We've been planning this for a little while.
Yes.
Karen, you are an internationally best-selling author of fiction and nonfiction, whose novels have been translated into more than 25 languages and to film. Your books cover a wide range of human experiences, from the lives of Italian-American immigrants to the mysteries of the Kabbalah. Very interesting. We met at the Detroit Working Writers event at Cranbrook. I think that was it at the end of last year?
End of last year.
End of last year. And then I had the pleasure of seeing you at my home.
Yes.
In January, I hosted an Authors Guild gathering, and your husband is a member of the Authors Guild. Are
Yes.
you guys both writers?
Yes. We met over typewriters at the student newspaper at Wayne State.
Oh my goodness, that's a story in itself.
He's an attorney and he writes on baseball history. He's a baseball history
Okay,
expert.
amazing. Okay, then that means he's going to be one of our guests in the future.
He'd love it.
Yes, I would love it too. Your work spans both fiction and nonfiction, from immigrant histories to the mysteries of the Kabbalah. What draws you to stories that explore identity, faith, and cultural legacy?
Well, my family, first of all, provided me with many stories, and I have one that I have not written yet. Doing genealogical research led me to, I had a grandfather who died before I was born. My mom thought she was pregnant with me. She told him, and he said, "I won't live to see the baby," and he died the next day. So all my life I heard that he survived the Cherry Mine disaster. My grandmother said it to me like, "Your grandfather walked on water." And so I began doing my genealogy with him to try to learn about the grandfather. He was a coal miner from near Bologna, Italy, and became a coal miner in Illinois, migrated to Illinois, where he met and married my grandmother. And so I knew he survived the Cherry Mine disaster, and that was the genesis of my book, Trapped, which is the story of our country's worst coal mine fire for loss of life and claimed an inordinate number of Italian-American immigrant lives. And so that was the first book that I did out of that. And then my mother kept telling me, "You don't have to learn Italian. You don't have to write to Italy for documents on the Sicilian side of the family. Grandma's got all those papers." And I never realized that Grandma kept putting me off every time I wanted to come in and see the papers because there was a family secret that was being hid.
Oh, that's the funnest part about doing the research for your unit.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. You never know what you're going to uncover.
When did you start this process, and what motivated you to start in that direction? You started writing at what point did you start writing?
I knew I wanted to be a writer from the time I was 12 years old because, and I majored in journalism, and I wrote a nonfiction book with a friend and a rabbi called "What Does Being Jewish Mean?" answering questions about Judaism for children. And then she said that she wanted to write some fiction. She was writing historical romances, and she wanted to write something contemporary. And I said, I'm not a novelist. And she said, "Any writer can write anything." And so the book that we wrote that was translated to film was called Something Borrowed, Something Blue, and it was about 4 women, all with secrets, whose fiancés would, cancel the marriage if they found out. And that was turned into a CBS TV movie starring Connie Selica and Twiggy.
Oh, that's amazing. That reminds me of the Joy Luck Club, kind of,
yeah.
Where the women that would gather and they each had their own stories. One of an interesting book that I think is the one that was a topic for us when we first met that we were discussing is Onto the Daughters. And I want to share this, the book cover. And this is an interesting story. Unto the Daughters confronts an honor killing within your own Sicilian-American family. What has that costed you personally and emotionally to uncover and publish that truth?
Well, growing up, you hear, we don't air our dirty laundry. There's a stay stay silent. There's Omertà, where the Sicilian, you don't show, you don't tell. And you hide the family secrets to keep the family honor. And my aunt, my mother's youngest sister, literally told me this family secret behind my grandmother's back when I finally was able to see the family documents that they'd been keeping from me. And there was a passport that my great-grandfather brought the family over from Sicily. And on the cover was his name and the King of Sicily, and inside was my great-grandmother's name and a list of the children. And there was one line that was completely obliterated by black ink. And my Aunt Grace said, "That's the one they got rid of. Did your mother ever tell you?" And I was like, and so she slammed the passport shut and she went to the kitchen sink, and I'm like, "You can't do that to me." So she finally told me what had happened. I thought I knew the family inside out, very close-knit family. Thought there were 3 boys, 3 girls, and 3 boys. But there was a 4th daughter, the one born after my grandmother, who was murdered by her older brothers in Detroit about 1920. And what it cost me was, I called my mother when I got home, and she growled and screamed at me in the phone she swore. She said, "Karen Ann, you forget that blankety blank blank blank. Your father went to his grave and he never knew that." And I'm like, "What?" And I have other uncles who went to their graves and never heard about it either, because everybody was, first of all, the first generation, my grandmother and her sister's generation, they were terrified of going against the brothers. And then the later generations, it was kept from them. But then when they found out, it was like, this is a horrible story and we don't want anybody to know. So I wrote it. I felt like whatever she did, Francesca was her name, whatever she did, she eloped with the young barber she was in love with instead of marrying someone 20 years older than herself, who her father had promised her to. And I thought, whatever she did, she didn't deserve the fate that she had. They took her to Belle Isle, and they killed her at Belle Isle, and she's somewhere in the Detroit River. So I did a lot of research. She's not in the 1920 census, so I know that the murder happened, right before that. But I wrote it as fiction. I wrote it 3 whole times as fiction. I still can't believe that I wrote an entire book, and each time I changed the age of the protagonist. And my agent couldn't sell it. And finally, my Trapped editor had said to me, "You need to give yourself permission to reimagine Francesca's life and write it as a true story." And so I did. I got books on the peasants of Sicily that were in Italian. I spent 12 years researching and writing and rewriting. And when I finally wrote it as narrative nonfiction, which is, you use your journalist head and your novelist heart to write it, then the agent was able to sell it. We sold it to St. Martin's. And then my editor said, "Okay, now you're going to rewrite it for the 5th time," because she took the story, and I started in Sicily and then went through to the end in a linear fashion, and she saw similarities between my mother's life and Aunt Frances's life, so she rearranged the whole thing like a figure 8. It also cost me cousins who were extremely, like, half the family was go girl and half the family was very upset, "You don't do this, and why did you put Grandma's and Grandpa's wedding picture on the cover?" And
So it took a lot of courage for you to tell the story. And I think one of the things that when we were talking is, and the reason you told me about your story is because we were talking about some of the similarities with the Middle Eastern culture, where there's things that we don't want to bring forth or are uncomfortable to discuss
right
with the public, but the truth is that helps bring a lot of healing and awareness to them. And I don't know, I feel like as long as it's done with art and in a storytelling fashion, not just to, we tend to sometimes, with regards to the news and when we're just sharing something, knock something down. But when you say it as a story, you end up understanding more in depth about the history of women. For instance, it seems like in your case, much of your work centers on silenced histories, particularly of women. So do you see your writing as a form of restoration or justice?
Definitely, especially with this book, because there is a curse. There's a Jewish curse. May your name and your memory be erased. And that's what they did with her. The night they murdered Francesca, they burned her clothing, they burned all of her photographs, and I felt that I had to give her back her name. I had to give her back her place in the family. And women, I'm still getting fan mail. The book came out 2007, I think it was, but I'm still getting mail from Sicilian women, Sicilian-American women or Italian-American women saying some similar things had happened in their family. And one woman, if I had written the book not just to reclaim Francesca, but for this one person, her cousin wrote to me and said, I read your book and I gave it to my cousin because I thought she needed to read it. And then I got a letter from the cousin saying, I'm 70 years old and all my life I thought it was my fault. I thought that everything that happened to me was my fault. I didn't understand the culture. She said, when I was a little girl, I got spanked every day if I did something wrong. And then my brother, the prince, was born. And then, because I was the oldest, I was responsible for him. So if he did something wrong, I got a spanking for him. And she said that reading the book just liberated her and took a weight off of her that she'd had since childhood. I sat and cried.
Well, I was going to ask you a question, which you just answered to it, where Trapped, but even though this is a different story, but Trapped was named one of the Chicago Tribune's favorite books of 2002. Nearly 2 decades later, why do you think stories of labor tragedy and immigrant struggle still resonate? And you kind of just now expressed something where this older woman in her 70s, that story resonated with her, and look at that connect that it made. Miles, thousands of miles away.
Well, there's something, and DNA, they're starting to bring this more to the forefront, is that generational trauma is in our DNA. I mean, in my family, nobody spoke of Francesca. My mother said she heard her aunts and her mother, kind of whispering about her when they thought the kids were in bed. But it was just like, it was such a shame, and it was such a dishonor. And it was, first thing I said to my mother was, well, did they go to the police? And she said, well, what go to the police? I said, well, how did they explain it? She said, well, they said Francesca had to go away and everybody knew what they meant. But like with Trapped, the settlement of the disaster, a coal mine caught fire. It was like the Titanic. It was declared the fireproof coal mine with electricity throughout. But 3 weeks before the disaster, there was a short in the lower vein where they kept the mules, and the electricity shorted out. So they went back to the old way of using kerosene torches to light the paths for the men. And the kerosene can on a fire on a flame on cut hay should not burn. But they think that kerosene hay came down to feed the mules as food one day, and the coal was going up. So they moved the hay to the side under a kerosene torch, and then the hay caught fire, and then the mine caught fire, and 45 minutes before they let the people know to leave the mine, and these were immigrants from many European countries, there was one sign in English as pointing to the exit of how to get out. So that disaster was the foundation, the settlement of that disaster, of workers' compensation law in this country. It had just been passed in Great Britain like a year or two before, and so the lawyers who were settling that case used it in Illinois, and then it became Illinois law and then U.S. law afterwards. So it's a very significant disaster that nobody knows about.
Yeah, this is why I love nonfiction so much, and memoirs and true stories, and I think you learn so much from them. Like, I wasn't aware of what you just shared with me just now, and I have to say that regarding your novels being translated into more than 25 languages, Oh, sorry, there was an error here. Regarding your novels being translated to more than 25 languages and adapted to film, how does that feel that your stories, especially because they're rooted in specific ethnic experiences, have reached such a global audience?
It's a big honor. It is a very big honor, and just recently, there was a book published called Italian-Americans on the Page, and I was absolutely floored. A number of years ago, two female professors of Italian-American studies had interviewed me and asked me questions about Unto the Daughters, and they had written a paper about it. And they compared it with a novel about an Italian immigrant, The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna by Juliet Grimes. And it ended up being a chapter in this book that just came out called Italian-Americans on the Page, which is comparing older and newer Italian literature. And I'm was flabbergasted to read what, my story is narrative nonfiction. Hers is a very popular fiction book, and that was a big thrill for me.
Yeah, it is an honor. Just historically, there's so much significance, and you have dual U.S. Italian citizenship. So, and how has that living between these two cultures shaped the lens through which you tell stories?
Well, growing up Italian-American, with half the family from Sicily, so from the sea, and half the family from northern Italy near Bologna from the mountains. So I said I've got one foot in the sea and one foot in the mountains, and heard two different dialects of Italian growing up. Obviously, the culture and the food and everything was very ethnic, and yet my mother had to drop out of school to take care of the family, and she was very, very firm on my education and being, a modern American woman. And so it was a little bit of both, keeping the heritage and then becoming a modern woman, remembering where you came from.
When I'm listening to you speak, we have so much in common. Immigrants have so much in common. Your stories right now, the struggles, and I'm thinking for us, for Italian immigrants, there's been more of stories, books, and films that are out there. And me and my family, not just myself, connected so much to Italian films. Like The Godfather. Yes, it's an amazing film, but at the same time, it's also the fact that there were some things that we could relate to that we could not find in our own stories.
Interesting. That's so interesting.
Yes. And so when I went and visited Italy, and I was there for a while, a couple of months, and so I was wanting to see other parts of the country outside of, mostly I was staying in Rome. And I decided to go south when I was going to see different areas because I wanted the less commercial and more the ethnic areas. So I went to Sicily. Part of it was motivated by the film The Godfather, because the way they were living in Sicily reminded me of some of our villages, the Christian villages in Iraq. And so even now as I'm talking to you, I think part of why we connected is because when you were sharing the story, I was so fascinated by the story that you were sharing because it resonated with me. And, I think that's the quality of a great storyteller, by the way.
Thank you.
Is that when you can, regardless of your background, when you can tell a story and touch other people's hearts of different backgrounds, but to top it off, that Mediterranean type of setting and some of the cultural backgrounds just felt familiar outside of it being a good story. And now I'm listening to you and feeling that same sense again of just why, just even listening to you, it feels like home, But now let's go and switch to the writing process.
Yes.
That can be fun, but also can be a little bit frustrating.
A little bit?
Yes, it requires a lot of patience and more work than people realize. So you have a background in journalism, And how has that training influenced your approach to research, narrative structure, and truth telling? Really, just in general, how has it helped you write the way that you do and be so successful at it?
Well, the journalistic training, the factual training, is when I was researching both of those books, I had to get the story straight. I did historical research, I did cultural research, and if there was something that I didn't quite understand or wasn't quite computing, I didn't use it. And there was one particular thing with Trapped. During the fire, there were 8 days, 21 men who will hold themselves up at the back of the mine for 8 days. They had gone to the back of the mine where the fire wasn't producing the gaseous air and they could breathe a little bit, and they wrote notes to their family. They said their prayers and lay down to die. And in the middle of the night, one of the men said, "What if we get up and we hack coal from the floor and from the walls and we barricade ourselves in?" So they were barricaded in for 8 days, and during that time, their lights of their headlamps went out. They had no water. There was some seepage, and they would take turns to drink. And all the men kept a diary who survived that. And I based on what the diary said of 2 different people. They had accused one of the men of going after the water out of turn. His family was furious with me when I went to an event in Cherry, one of the anniversaries of the disaster, and said that I had accused him of. I said, no, I read what people said, and I just reported back what the other people said. So I didn't pass. I try when I'm doing nonfiction, not to pass judgment. And I have a third story from my family, and I don't have the wife's side of the story. They never had kids, and I only have our family side of the story. So I've been reluctant to write about it. And it's about my grandfather's cousin who co-founded Fairbanks, Alaska. And it's a fascinating story, but I haven't fully researched the wife's story. It's presumed that she murdered him during their divorce.
Oh my God. Another bestseller on the way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, see, these are the complications that people don't understand the extent of. And, right now, and we're in an era where historical memory seems fragmented or politicized. And what responsibility do you think that writers have when reconstructing the past?
I think the writers have to do their research and tell the truth. As a kid, I loved when we had Egyptian and Roman history. I loved history when it was in the ancient times. When it got to American history, not so much. And I didn't fall in love with history until it came alive for me in novels. And so when I would read a story set in a certain time period and learned about that time period, and that's what I think is a responsibility of writers who write historical fiction or who write nonfiction, is to do the research and to get the facts. And, everything can be subjective, but to try to be as objective as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Nobody can be 100% perfect with regards to the history, and you can't, and you don't have the whole story oftentimes, and you have to go with what you do have to, if you're pursuing a story. But I think that responsibility is serious, and I see some people change the narrative in a way where, I'll give you an example, like one of my all-time favorite movies, and will continue to be so despite this little scene. I don't know if you've ever seen Shirley Valentine. It's a comedy about this woman in her 40s, and I don't know why I was in my early 20s when I fell in love with this movie, because the humor is wonderful, and I believe it won quite a bit of awards. But this British woman, she's this kind of a bored housewife, and she goes to Greece and falls in love with it. But on several occasions during this film, which I watched again and again, it was originally a screenplay. It was a play. I can't think of by a famous writer, but in several scenes, she mentions that the wheel was invented by the Greeks. And that was before I had looked into my own ancestry and my own history and learned that it was invented by Mesopotamians, modern day Iraq. And I thought, well, why did the writer, that makes a big difference. And at that time when I was watching it, I was so influenced by the film that I took it as fact because I didn't think that they would change that part up. And important. She said the most important invention in history is the wheel invented by the Greeks. Well, the first part is right. It is the most important invention was the wheel, but it was by Mesopotamians. And I thought, wow, just that one switch, what we can do with narrative. And so it could be also used in a way, really, we have that power to translate and present stories. And I think as long as the good, to the best of our intent, what we put out there, because nobody's going to ever get it right or perfect, or sometimes you are going to have the wrong information, but not that information. And I just thought that was interesting. And then I think I made a couple of very important decisions along my writing career and my film career on things that I would not do. I would try to stay as authentic as possible to the story and just not change the narrative to the point where sometimes it feels like kind of, you're really reconstructing or flat out lying about something. But I still watch that movie and love it. It's really good. You should watch it. I brought it up so many times. A very beautiful story. And the main actress in it was recently, she passed away. So for emerging writers who want to explore their own family histories but fear what they might uncover, what advice would you give them?
Be fearless. Be fearless, mainly because it happened in the past. It's not something that you did, but it reverberates down through the generations. And sometimes secrets are not good and they're harmful. And my best advice to people who were doing genealogy is to sit down with a tape recorder, or now you can do it voice recording on your telephone, is to sit down with the oldest relatives that you have and ask questions. I mean, many of us don't think about the questions we have for our ancestors, our elders, until they're gone and we can't ask them anymore. But, family history is your inheritance, and good or bad, I think it's important to know that and to try to make sense out of it and not to be afraid.
So when you were writing, and this is me personally, I'm interested in this because I do write a lot of memoir and nonfiction. I've appreciated this more and more, these kind of stories over the years. I've appreciated them so much more because I find them more fascinating, to be honest with you. True stories or family stories. Do you sometimes find that you come across something and then you have to kind of make the decision on whether or not, do I include this? Do I not? And then at the end, when you do make that decision, what is it usually based on?
Oh, well, there was a decision. There were some incidences that I included it unto the daughters and some that I did not, because it wouldn't enhance the story. It wouldn't serve any purpose other than to be sensationalized. And, you need to know where to draw the curtain a little bit. And it didn't serve the story. I guess I'd say it that way.
That's an excellent response. Yes, I can feel that. So, what is Karen working on next?
I have finished a novel. I'm two things on board. I finished a novel. It's another kind of a Jewish Da Vinci Code kind of. I had written two of them, the Book of Names and the Illumination, with my writing partner Jill Gregory. And this one I'm writing on my own. I finished it. I'm looking for an agent, and it is a reclaiming not a redemption, but a reclaiming of Lilith. And it is a multicultural story about a woman who submits her DNA, and the shocking results of that DNA test have her in the crosshairs of two men who are after her immortal blood. And so it's a thriller, a multicultural thriller.
Well, then we're going to have to interview you about that, won't we? In the future, hopefully soon.
And then the next one is, which even if just my kids read it or my grandchildren read it, is that when I was a sophomore in high school and the Beatles first came to the United States, the University of Detroit started to stamp out the Beatles campaign. And I was aghast that they would never come here, because when they landed in New York, one of the third questions they said was, do you know that Detroit wants to stamp out the Beatles? And Paul McCartney said, we're going to stamp out Detroit. So I thought I'd never get to see them. I sat down and I wrote a letter to the teen page of the Detroit News every Wednesday. If they published your editorial, you got $10. As I'm rolling it out of the computer, I roll it back in the typewriter, and I add, anybody who agrees with me that there are more people here who love the Beatles than not, send me your name, I'm starting a petition. Ended up with 31,737 signatures, and nobody would take this, couldn't drop it on the stage, couldn't send it to a fan club, couldn't send it to their record company. And so I was bound and determined to get this petition to the Beatles, and ended up spending a half an hour backstage alone with them 2.5 years later. And decided if I could do that, I could do anything I wanted to do.
Yes, that is a very inspiring story. I love it. Well, we are out of time, but you do have a minute or so to share any last words.
My last words would be to people who love books, the best thing you can do for an author when you read their book is to leave a review on Amazon or on Goodreads, or to spread the word, because we sit in a vacuum at home, we creatives, and it's a very lonely job, and something that we can work on for a year or 2 or 3 years, you can read in a week, or sometimes people told me they read Unto the Daughters in 2 days. But the best gift that you can give to an author is to share a review of the book.
Oh, that's excellent advice. I know when my feature film came out, and I had so many people messaging me about what they think about the film, and not putting and it was all very good feedback that they were giving me, but it wasn't on the review. So yeah, but that's very good advice. Well, Nancy, did I call you? Sorry, I was almost going to say Nancy, who works at CMN TV, but Karen. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining me today. I do look forward to your future work, and like I said, maybe we can reconnect here again to share with the audience.
I would love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching, and have a wonderful day.